Hi there. I'm Machine Pun Kelly, and I want to start a new series today called Five Things I'm Reading. And for each of these, ah, okay. Hi there. I'm Machine Pun Kelly, and today I want to start something new. It'll be a series called Five Things I'm Reading. Uh, For each of the articles I discuss, there will be a link in the descriptions article below. And in cases where it's a paywall site, I'll make sure that it's a gift link so that you can read it for free. Today, I want to start off with this article from ProPublica, which discusses legal standing rights and explain just how legally trepidatious this is. Billionaire investor Musk has called Doge maximally transparent, which it has not been. President Donald Trump has said that some 100 people work for the group, but his administration has refused to make information about Doge's spending and operations public, so that is obviously not transparent. Most of Doge's money, records show, has come in the form of payments from other federal agencies, made possible by a nearly century-old law called the Economy Act. To steer these funds to the new department and the Trump administration has treated Doge as if it were a federal agency. And the Economy Act was something that was passed in 1932. And basically what it did was say that if there was duplication between federal agencies and spending, then they should just kind of work together rather than spend the same money twice. And because that was something that was designed to make the government more efficient, the Trump administration is trying to say that the Economy Act applies to Doge, although that is highly legally questionable, because what they're not trying to find redundancies in spending, which is what the Economy Act was about. The use of the Economy Act would seem to subject Doge to the same open records laws that cover most federal agencies, such as the EPA or the State Department. That's the other one, with the Economy Act and with all federal spending, there's supposed to be publicly available records, which is ironic because everything is already publicly available, and Doge is supposed to be saying, finding all this secret spending, but the only secret spending going on is from Doge. However, Doge has refused to respond to Freedom of Information Act, saying it operates with executive privileges. So now they're saying that because it's basically operating on an executive order. But an executive order doesn't empower a department. And so if they're operating on an executive order, but with the authority of a department, then that's the inherent conflict. Because if they're just operating under executive orders, then they don't have the power to do what they're doing. If they are operating under the power of a department, then they have to have congressional approval. They have to have, this kind of transparency. But they're basically trying to act as a department without the legal requirements to be a department. The conflicting stances put the Trump administration in a bind, legal experts say. If Doge is a federal agency, it can't shield its records from the public. It can't. If it's not an agency, then Doge's tens of millions of dollars in funding weren't legally allocated and should be returned, some contend. The administration can't have it both ways, said Adam Grog, a former deputy general counsel at Governing for Impact. Either it's an agency covered by FOIA within the authority to do what it's doing, or it's purely advising the president and can't be directing agencies in the way it is. U.S. in recent hearing, the courts agree. In a recent hearing, U.S. District Judge John Bates characterized the government's position as, we're not an agency where we don't want to be an agency, but we are an agency, this one instance where we want to be. And I think this is important because there's been a lot of talk about the Republicans attacking the judges and accusing them of being biased. And I think that we've lost the forest through the trees on this one, both on the left and on the right. there is a very real discussion on the legality of Doge, and if anything, there is not any justification for it. Like, I have not seen an actual solid legal justification for Doge, especially to be doing what they're doing and acting as insanely as they are. There needs to be a legal justification and not a kind of this duality. And there's this one of the names newly. So Doge went through and they've been trying to, or ProPublica has been trying to find all the people that work for Doge. And one of the names newly added to the tracker, Catherine Armstrong Loving, is the sibling of crypto executive Brian Armstrong, who runs the industry leader Coinbase, which Coinbase donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund, and Armstrong met with Trump to discuss appointments to administration posts, according to the Wall Street Journal. So this is very much looking like corruption, right? You donate money, you get your sister a job, and this is all supposed to be transparent and finding corruption, but it really seems like it's just an excuse for corruption and actual, lack of transparency to hide it. And how much? Well, so far, ProPublica found more than $39 million has been earmarked to Doge in the Trump administration's first month. What are they spending that money on is really hard to say, and especially without any indication of how much these 100 people are being paid. And then there's also this other aspect. Funding one agency from another's budget is not unusual, experts say, but money cannot be moved around for whatever purpose the White House wants. It is restricted by something called the Purpose Statute, which requires funds to pay for items Congress has specifically prescribed. And this is important because some people are saying, well, the president, the executive branch doesn't have to spend money exactly the way that Congress said, that there's some wiggle room there. And there's some case history of that, like Obama chose not to, and Biden also chose not to prosecute felony convictions for marijuana use, right, on a federal level, even though it was, technically a felony. So there's some wiggle room here, but this is more like there's the executive branch can choose how it carries out what Congress has mandated. It cannot choose whether to carry out what Congress has mandated. So Congress says, okay, this, marijuana is a felony, and therefore, here's this money for prosecuting drug crimes, right? Well, it's one thing to say, well, so this is like the difference between prosecuting marijuana as a felony or prosecuting any drug charges as a felony. Like there's money that's allocated to prosecuting drug charges. How you distribute that is up to the president. So you have to look at what the purpose of the statute is, or the purpose of the funding was, and you can't just say, okay, we're not going to spend money on this thing that was very specifically said to spend money on. So the next article I want to get is this one from military.com. And this is really concerning, actually. And it's not immediately obvious why. No more female 4-stars. Franchetti firing leaves top ranks filled by men. So now it says Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth fired Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the Navy's first female chief, last week without any clear explanation. Part of the purge of top uniformed leadership that included Joint Chiefs Chairman, who is black, and sent shockwaves across the military. Franchetti's firing has left the military without a single woman in a 4-star general or admirable leadership position, as women in top positions are already a rarity across the services, and many female officers say they're concerned that the ouster will have far-reaching consequences. So, what are those far-reaching consequences, and why are they claiming to have fired her? They really haven't given any justification, but the main thing that they're saying is that she was a DEI hire, and they want to hire based on merit. But there is nothing to indicate that she was not meritorious of having that position. In fact, everything points to the contrary, that she very much earned the position. But apparently, if you're promoted when you're a woman, that just proves that you were promoted because you were a woman to them. Military.com spoke with about a half dozen female officers ranging from the mid-career levels to generals after the firing, and many of them noted that Franchetti's credentials were fully in line with her predecessors in the chief naval operations role. By failing to justify the firing, they argue the Trump administration is sending a clear message. Women are no longer welcome in the military's highest ranks. Okay, so why is that important? Let's go down to this part. Earlier in February, retired Admiral James Stavridis, I don't know how to pronounce that name, sorry if I got it wrong, a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, publicly said that he couldn't recommend military service to his daughter today, while citing Military.com's reporting on the Trump administration removing websites dedicated to female service members. Efforts have been largely buoyed by a consistent interest from women in enlisting, as men have become increasingly ineligible for service. Male enlistments have dropped 35% in the last decade. Studies have shown a troubling trend in U.S. education. Boys are falling behind girls in nearly every academic category, including reading and writing. That achievement gap starts in elementary school and often widens over time. Many of the services recruiting woes are tied to applicants performing poorly on the military academy's entrance exam. So based on merit, again, this is the kind of exam that they would, point to if it was, opposite. Women do better on the entrance exam than men. And men aren't passing it. And women are. And so we've had to recruit more and more women into the military to compensate for the fact that men aren't cutting the mustard. So when you start belittling women and firing them for being successful, then that's going to dissuade women from joining the military. So you're actually lowering the standard of the military and lowering the quality of the military by firing women that have achieved more. And you're doing this all under the auspices, or all under the auspices of trying to make it more meritorious. You're actually making it less meritorious. And this is not just some liberal left-wing blog that is saying this. This is military.com. Okay, so the next one up is U.S. halts cyber operations against Russia, media reports. Defense, again, Pete Hegseth, has ordered U.S. Cyber Command to suspend offensive cyber and information operations against Russia, according to a report by The Record. The decision aligns with President Donald Trump's efforts to negotiate an end to Russia's war in Ukraine under terms that critics argue favor Moscow. Two U.S. officials familiar with the directive told the Washington Post that the pause will remain in effect while diplomatic discussions continue. Cybersecurity experts warn that the move benefits one of America's most persistent cyber adversaries, potentially weakening U.S. leverage in both cyber and conventional military operations. So this is like literally endangering the United States. Meanwhile, intelligence officers emphasize the risk of halting cyber operations against Russia, which remains one of the most active cyber threats to the U.S. security. The pause includes operations that typically expose or disrupt Russian malware before it can be deployed against American systems. So it's, like, this is bad, right? Like, we don't want Russian cyber attacks and malware in American systems. Like, this should not be a controversial thing to say. A former senior defense official told the record that suspending these efforts, even temporarily, could allow Russian hackers to regroup and strengthen their offensive capabilities. At a recent United Nations cyber meeting, a State Department official highlighted cyber threats from China, but made no mention of Russian-backed ransomware groups, which have targeted critical USA infrastructure, including fuel pipelines and hospitals. So Russia is trying to attack our fuel pipelines and our hospitals, and the Secretary of Defense is saying, let them do it. We should not do anything to try to stop them because, look, they deserve Ukraine or something like that. Anyway, this is a story that has not been reported much. I feel like we need to like actually realize that Russia is still our enemy in spite of what certain people say. And there are real potential consequences here. All right. The next one is a great read from David French, who's actually a conservative columnist. And this one is called Trump is Breaking Things We Can't Just Fix. And this is really, I think, this is more a holistic thing than a specific narrative. But he talks about the damage Trump is doing to the nation that maybe, isn't going to be fixed by just winning the election. To understand the gravity of the harm Trump has inflicted on the United States in the first month and a half of its presidency, a comparison with the Cold War is helpful. Republicans and Democrats often had sharp differences in their approach to the Soviet Union, very sharp. The parties would differ, for example, on the amount of military spending, on the approach to arms control, and on American military interventions against Soviet allies and their proxies. These differences were important, but they were less important than the many points of agreement. Both parties were committed to NATO. Both parties saw the Soviet Union as a grave national security threat it was. For decades, both parties were more or less committed to a strategy of containment that sought to keep Soviet tyranny at bay. So at least we agreed that Russia was the enemy, right? Whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, you recognize that. At no point did Americans go to the polls and choose between one candidate committed to NATO and another candidate sympathetic to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. The very idea would have been fantastical. Can you imagine? If somebody had ran on, disbanding NATO in 1992 and, aligning with the USSR. Even if you talk to Republicans, one of Reagan's great moments was, tear down this wall. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And whether or not, he's actually responsible, as Republicans say he is, for disbanding the USSR, we all agree that the USSR being dismantled was a good thing. Trump's attacks on Zelensky is just the latest salvo against our allies. Back in office, Trump has taught our most important strategic partners a lesson they will not soon forget. America can and will change sides. This is the difference, right? Now we're talking about half the country is saying Europe is our enemy and Russia is our ally, even though Russia is the one that's actively attacking us. And somehow, because Trump says something, it's like half the country has to go into idiot mode. And no, Russia is still our enemy. Russia is attacking us. We are at a kind of war. We're at least at cyber war with Russia. And the Russians want to ignore it. And Russia is at war with Ukraine. And they're at war with... Russia is at war with Ukraine. And they want to go beyond that. They need to be contained. And that's a reality that Republicans and Trump supporters want to say doesn't matter, or they even want to. Okay. Trump's attack on Zelensky is just the latest salvo against our allies. Back in office, Trump has taught our most important strategic partners a lesson they will not soon forget. America can and will change sides. Its voters may indeed choose a leader who will abandon our traditional alliances and actively support one of the world's most dangerous and oppressive regimes. And this is the key point. Even if Democrats sweep the midterms in 2026 and defeat the Republican candidate in 2028, that lesson will still hold. Our allies will know that our alliances are only as stable as the next presidential election, and that promises are only good for one term at most. So we can win back everything. The Democrats can win back the House and the Senate in 2026, and they can win back the White House in 2028. But forever we're tainted with this, that suddenly we can just have a president win and just derail everything, derail our treaties, derail our alliances, start a trade war, start all the lunacy that he's doing, and that's it. It's all contingent on one person. It's extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to build a sustainable defense strategy under those circumstances. Like, we cannot be upholding ourselves against the entire world. We can't be completely isolated. But how can we have alliances if our allies can't trust us to keep our alliances? It's impossible to enact sustainable trade policies. Because again, if you change on a dime, you're just going to say, we're just going to arbitrarily put a 25% tax on our tariff on Canada. How is Canada supposed to then rely on us as a trade partner? And it's impossible to conduct any form of lasting diplomacy because the next president can come along and just upend everything. What's the point of making a treaty with Iran if the next president comes along and ends that treaty with Iran? So it makes America very, very unstable internationally if that's the case. At the same time that Trump was turning on Ukraine, his administration canceled thousands of contracts funding malaria prevention, polio vaccine initiatives, tuberculosis treatments, Ebola surveillance, and hospitals and refugee camps. So, with the U.S. aid, people in different countries were dying and are now dying and will be dying, and that aid allowed goodwill for the United States, and now the canceling of those will cause ill will towards the United States. The same principle applies at home. Trump's waves of layoffs in the federal government, his promiscuous pardons of political allies, and his attempts to shutter statutorily created agencies means that domestic policy is now just as contingent as foreign policy. So everything else becomes just as arbitrary too. A federal job, a federal agency, a federal grant. If everything is just contingent on a next election, how can you ever plan anything more than 4 years out? So he is attempting to upend the structure of the American government to place the president at the unquestioned pinnacle of American power. And so then he goes on and he talks about this is not what the founders envisioned. To properly grasp the founders' intentions, I highly recommend listening to my colleague Ezra Klein's February 5th interview with Yuval Levin, a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. The president is elected, Levin said, but the president was not thought of as a representative figure. That office is one person in a vast country. One person can't really represent the vast country. That has to be done by a plural institution like Congress. And Congress is designed to act on a dime. As Levin said, the logic of the American Constitution is that only the majority rule is legitimate, but that majorities are very dangerous to minorities, and that means we want a system that forces majorities to grow and broaden before they are empowered. In other words, when you get elected with a plurality of the vote, you do not have an absolute mandate to upend the entire government, every single treaty organization, trade organ. If you win with a plurality of the vote, it doesn't give you unilateral mandate to just change everything. Congress needs to still be involved, and the Supreme Court and the court system still needs to be involved. The U.S. government was designed to move slowly, not quickly. And that's because its wisdom is to avoid exactly what is happening right now. When the system is working, meaningful change is hard. It's difficult to build the broad electoral majorities that forged the New Deal or the Great Society. But that also means that real change is also lasting change, and that's a very good thing. So, like, you can't have everything change on a dime every 4 years. Could you imagine a world in which the very existence of Social Security and Medicare hinged on a single president's whims? The president is to shepherd the treaties and alliances the Senate ratifies. Okay, so he elaborates on the international part. The president is not supposed to just decide what our treaties and alliances are. He shepherds the treaties and alliances the Senate ratifies. He is not the person who decides whether those institutions or alliances should exist at all. If Trump is to accomplish his will, the chaos could revive the electoral prospects of the Democratic Party, but that alone won't fix the problem, cure or our instability, or heal us as a nation. And so this is where, especially since even Congress is basically letting him do this, the Republicans in Congress, the Supreme Court can't make Trump support Ukraine, nor should it be able to, but it can enforce government contracts. It can prevent civil servants from unlawful termination. It can protect congressionally created agencies from presidential destruction. In other words, it has the opportunity to defend the constitutional order. And that's where the Supreme Court really needs to step up and stop being so sycophant. I mean, this is not, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the moment and not think about things beyond this president. But if you assign this president these powers, then you assign every president these powers. And that is not what the founding fathers wanted. And that is not a sensible way to operate a government. Immense damage has already been done. How many presidential elections will it take before our closest allies once again agree we're a reliable partner? This is, I think, I even though it's the New York Times, and I know a lot of people are mad at the Times right now, I still advise using this gift link and reading this article. And finally, this is sort of tangential to the Times article, and this is by Charlie Warzel. Welcome to the Great Emboldening. And he starts off with Jeff Bezos as just an introductory topic. When Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post almost 12 years ago, he went out of his way to assuage fears that he would turn the paper into his, he would not turn, or to assuage fears that he would turn the paper into his personal mouthpiece. The values of the Post do not need changing, he wrote at the time. The paper's duty will remain to its readers and not to the private interest of its owners. For much of his tenure, Bezos kept that promise. On Wednesday, he betrayed it. And, when Bezos wrote, we are going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets. And while those are both opinions, and what personal liberties and free markets mean are, hard to define, but it seems like these are right-wing talking points. We'll cover other topics, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. So they are no longer going to publish anything that Jeff Bezos disagrees with, is essentially what he's saying. And this is after, on the heels of him just out of nowhere deciding that the Washington Post wasn't going to endorse a president after it was determined by the editorial board, which is normally who you would expect to do such things, was going to endorse Kamala Harris. Whatever Bezos' personal reasons are, equally important is the fact that he is emboldened to interfere so brazenly. And so this is actually, like, the article is not so much about what Bezos is doing. It is about the atmosphere that has been created to where you have the oligarchs and the tech giants acting like they can act with abandon. Things that normally would have been anathema are now suddenly welcome. A broader change has been away among the tech and political elite over the past few years or so. And this is the great emboldening, where ideas and actions that might have been unthinkable, objectionable, or reputationally risky in the past are now on the table. And just to give you an idea, I watched an interview today with a woman that talked about how the Civil Rights Act needs to be overturned, and even says, was it really so bad that they couldn't use the same water fountains? So, I mean, like, this is actually being aired on network TV now, these kind of opinions. Unscrupulous politicians and business leaders in places such as the Silicon Valley now had a playbook to use their critics. Okay, sorry, I skipped over some stuff. Just based on the way that Trump reacts and acts, with just lying about everything, calling things fake news, denying truth, and, just making reality a discussion rather than accepting reality. What's happened is there is this new atmosphere. Unscrupulous politicians and business leaders in places such as Silicon Valley now had a playbook to use against their critics, and following Trump's election, a movement to back it. Wittingly or not, nobody embodied this behavior better than Musk, who has now spent the past decade operating with a healthy contempt for institutions, any semblance of decorum, and the law. Trump winning the popular vote in November only amplified this dynamic. CEOs, including Mark Zuckerberg, pledged to roll back past content moderation reforms and corporate inclusivity initiatives, viewed now as excess of the coronavirus pandemic emergency and on an outdated regime of overreach. Bosses in Silicon Valley who saw the social justice initiatives and worker solidarity of the COVID crisis as a kind of mutiny felt emboldened and sought to regain control over their workforce, included by requiring people to return to the office. Tech executives professed they were no longer afraid to speak their mind. On X, the Airbnb co-founder Joe Gebbia, who now works for Musk's Doge initiative, described the late 2010s as the Joe Biden era as a time of silence, shaming, and fear, whatever that means. The people like Gebbia, former liberals who used to fall in line with the politics of their peers, are now supporting Trump. The entrepreneur wrote as part of a broader wake-up call, and even one right-wing personality said it's okay to say retard again. And that's great. Musk and others, including Steve Bannon, have taken this step further, making what appear to be Nazi salutes while mocking anyone in the media who calls them out. As my colleagues and I have reported, some Doge staffers have entered offices and accessed sensitive government data without the proper clearances and background checks, and has bypassed security protocols without their consent. But the second Trump administration operates as though it is unconcerned with abiding by the standards and practices of federal government. So, what all of this is getting at is they have taken a plurality majority, or a plurality win. They did win the popular vote, but by a plurality, not by the majority. And they have taken this to mean that they can do carte blanche whatever they want, as though they have this unparalleled mandate, And he won by less than what Biden did, right? But still, Biden didn't have a mandate. He did, according to them. And so they're just taking that as whatever they want to do means that there is a mandate to do it. Like, if all of a sudden there's a mandate against DEI, nobody, we didn't vote on DEI. Most people didn't vote on DEI. Most people voted on the price of eggs, which they have not done. Like, there is this, what did he call it? The great emboldening. And that's exactly what it is. They're using this very narrow win as an excuse to do whatever they want. In a moment of deep institutional distrust, Trump 2.0 has tried to make the case that anything goes, and that previously unthinkable uses of executive power, such as, say, dismantling U.S. aid, may be possible if executed with enough shamelessness and bravado. And that is really an excellent point, because it's almost like the more shameless they act, the more fervently their supporters will defend them. Bezos may or may not be turning the Post opinion section into a state media apparatus for apparatus for Trump and his oligarch class. Either way, the pivot is a direct product of the second Trump era and mirrors the president's own trajectory within the United States government. So, anyway, I think this is a really valid point, and it's an article well worth the read. Hope you take the time to do it. This went longer than I expected, and I'll try and get better at that. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I will talk to you later.